3, we will come to the representations of yoga in the West, because there is something that maybe people from India are not aware of when we talk about yoga in the West. And so the second part will be about this subject matter, which is the representations of yoga outside India. And the third and last point of this paper is the contribution that Pujya Swamiji has given to correct, to fix this idea, this wrong idea that Westerners have about Hindu Dharma. And that will be the end. Okay? So, for a start, I came to Rishikesh in 1987, which means almost 30 years now. Some of you were not born at that time. Were you born, Niraji? No? So as a young man, I was already here. And before that, I had already started to practice yoga. And I came looking for moksha. Before I tell you this story, I would like to say that I am here in the first place as a devotee and shishya of Pujya Swamiji. Maybe that can explain the rest, as you will see. When I started practicing yoga, I didn't understand what was it about. I have heard that there was something called nirvana or samadhi or moksha, and that seemed a sufficient reason, a good reason to dedicate my own life. When I was 13, I wrote a book about Om by a Westerner who was one of the first ones that built those bridges between the Indian vision and the Western philosophy. His name was Alan Watts. You have heard of him, surely. Then, that was when I was 13, that was in the 70s. And when I had some money and I was old enough to get a visa to come alone to India, then I flew here and went to practice yoga at the Shivananda Ashram. At that time, I thought that yoga was some kind of discipline that, of the kind that if you do this, then you gain that. If you do the proper way, the asanas and pranayamas, then somehow in a magical way, samadhi will come. And then no more bills to pay, no more back pain, no more joint problems, no more hunger, no need to use money, no need to take a bus, nothing. From there, that was the idea, and that is unhappily the idea that most of the Western yogis, if we can use that name, yogis, most of the Western yogis have about yoga. Like, it's like, you know, there's this child in front of the soup, and mother says, if you behave properly, and if you take your soup, then you will, after that, gain your dessert. And I was like the kid, like doing the homework to gain the dessert, which was samadhi or nirvana or moksha. But time passed by and samadhi wasn't coming. And I was kind of immature from the emotional point of view. I had like I was young, but still I was immature for a young man, like a kid, you know. Like, why isn't this happening? I'm doing the right thing. And worst of all, one of my teachers then in Brazil that was self-taught, he didn't have a master, he didn't have a guru, told me, well, if you practice like you do, and I was spending like sometimes 8 hours a day doing asanas. I remember when I first came to Rishikesh, I was staying by the Shivananda Ashram in the Ram Ashram library, which is gone now. And my first Sanskrit teacher was from Goa, so he would speak Portuguese, and I was like very welcome there. I would practice asanas on the rooftop, looking at the clock tower on the other side in Paramarthniketan. And I would say, okay, Paschimottanasana. Breathe in, breathe out, and then I would watch the clock on the other side. And waited for 1 hour. 1 hour Paschimottanasana. Then, second posture, Bhujangasana, the cobra pose. I would watch the clock and wait for 1 hour. So I would do 8 asanas in 8 hours. I was kind of fanatical, you know. And still, samadhi wasn't coming. And so this teacher told me, in less than 1 year you get samadhi if you practice like this. And it never happened. And it is not happening now. But I am very happy. So the problem is that I was looking at yoga from the wrong perspective. And a few years passed after that, and in the 90s I came back to India. But this way I came with a one-way ticket because I wanted to put an end to that struggle because it was taking my life, because I had this intuition that yoga had something really good, but I couldn't get it from there. So I thought, maybe if I go to the original place and stay with the people who have created and keep these. I didn't know anything about the Vedic tradition at the time, but I thought maybe that will make a difference. So the first time the first day I came, I stepped down from the plane and found this teacher that was living in the Om Anand Yoga Ashram, which is in Indore, Madhya Pradesh. And I went there and practiced with this Om Anandji. And he was a great sadhak, and he was a great soul. So I told him, this was one of the Mahakumbha Mela times, like I made maybe in 96 or, yes, 96. Yes, but he had some Gangaji water in his ashram. So I told him, please Swamiji, let me enter the Hindu Dharma because I want to solve this from inside the Vedic tradition and from inside the Indian culture. And from there I felt that my practice took a big turn, and I went to the next step, let's put it like that. And when I had my Upanayana, my Dvija, I started to feel something was changing because I would feel protected by Dharma. And that gave me a lot of confidence to go on with the process of practicing outside India, because like I went back the next year to Brazil, and from there I felt protected. I mean, because Brazil maybe is not the most conductive place for a dharmic life, because there's lots of distractions. Like you have here a culture in which conditions are very conductive to self-knowledge. There's no such thing as Dayānanda Ashram anywhere in Brazil or in Portugal, as far as I know. So I had enough inner strength to go on and keep like my vegetarian diet and all the rest, because it was easy being a Hindu, despite I was alone. Then, a few years later, I came to meet Swāmi Dayānanda Saraswatiji in one of his many visits to Brazil. I don't know if you are aware, but he went more than 15 times to Brazil because he was so compassive, and he has this great student there, Gloria Arieira, with whom I started my Vedanta studies in the beginning of this century, or maybe a little earlier, in the time of the tapes. Now we have CDs and MP3s, but that was in the time of the tapes, the ones you play here. So I started to talk to people about the things that I found, and they started to come. So the first time I came here to Rishikesh to stay at the Dayānanda Ashram for one of those camps that Neeraj mentioned, I asked Pujya Swamiji to validate my Dvija, which means to teach me his way, all the things that I had learned from Om Anandji. And as you know, he is, I can't speak about Pujya Swamiji in the past. He's such a great soul that he agreed with that. Like, at the time he didn't know me that much, but still, he was so kind and so generous that I had this opportunity. And then, out of there, when I started, of course, my Vedanta studies with the Tattva Bodha, then we went to Upadesha Saran, then we went to a number of these prakaranas, and then we entered the Bhagavad Gita. And from there, I could feel that there was something else, something even bigger than the words that we were listening at the time. Like we would gather a group of friends to study with these audio tapes, and I was listening to the tapes and like the recorded classes, and I thought there's something much bigger than those words here, and that started slowly to show me how to practice yoga with the proper attitude, because most of the people in the West think that yoga is a technique, yoga is an exercise, or yoga is a practice, which means something that you do, like now I am doing yoga, now I am not doing yoga. And there's nothing that could be more wrong than that, as you know, because you know what is the meaning of karma yoga. So, in that perspective, what we have there in the West, when we strip yoga out of the Vedic culture and the values and all the things that come with, or that come along with yoga, what we have is just an exercise which goal is centered into health, what they call their quality of life, which means that you sleep well, you eat well, and you have a more or less shant life, and that's all. And in the best of the cases, some people do their practices, and if I say yoga, I put not only there under that umbrella name asana or pranayama or relaxation techniques, but also the practice of mantras and meditation. And there is a number of people, but these are really few, who look to yoga as a source for mystical experiences. And that's all. In the worst of the cases, a system for good shape, for something physical, and in the best of the cases, something that will give you mystical experiences. And that's all. So, I think I was very lucky at the time in my personal process, because I'm sure I wasn't the first, but I could see that yoga would change its meaning when you do it under the vision of Advaita Vedanta. Because like that, yoga becomes nididhyasanam, becomes the third part of this process of 3 steps, shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam, and then I could practice yoga no matter what technique. If I was doing pranayama or mantra or meditation, I knew that that was for Antarkarana Shuddhi. So, as you know, nowadays yoga is getting more and more popular in the West. That started in the mid-90s, and 20 years have passed. And from the 90s, like a pendular movement started in the West, and it didn't stop. After 20 years, it's still growing, because things grow, and then, how do you say? They contract, and they grow, and then contract. But after 20 years, yoga in the West is still growing. And you just look around here in Rishikesh and you see many foreigners like myself with these yoga mats under their armpits, walking up and down. And now I'm going to do this sadhana here, now I'm going to do that asana practice, now I'm going to that teacher. As Swamiji used to say, guru shopping. And if those people are lucky, and many of them are yoga teachers, because I don't know all of them, but I know a number of them, many of them are yoga teachers. In the best of the cases, they could be lucky enough to find a good teacher that shows them the tradition, and that can be a turning point for any honest practitioner, any honest yoga practitioner. I don't know if we can use the word yogi, but that is how we refer to ourselves in the West. I mean, it's a big word, yogi, but still we use it. So there's this cliche in the West that says that the Western civilization is rational. Have you heard of that? And they kind of juxtapose the idea of rationality to bhakti or to any other posture that you could have, which includes, of course, shraddha. So shraddha and rationality are not compatible, okay? And if you come from a rational culture in that way, yoga is not acceptable as it comes from India. As, for instance, over 120 years ago, Swāmi Vivekananda brought yoga to the West for the first time. That version, let's say, that idea of yoga is not acceptable because there's this shraddha component there. And for them, if you translate shraddha as blind faith, you have to believe that there is something the yogis call, or the Indians call, or the Hindus call Brahman. And they believe that they are Brahman. So that's the idea, you get that? And if you come from that standpoint, then yoga is not acceptable. So what they did there, they started to strip yoga out of a few of the things that define yoga. For instance, the Sanskrit language. They removed Sanskrit because they say Sanskrit makes yoga incomprehensible to the Westerners. So we should remove, instead of let's say Vrikshasana, we will talk about the three poles. Instead of speaking about Siddhasana, we will use the name perfection pose and so on. So they removed Sanskrit. It's okay if you do that. But sooner or later you will have to find a word to translate moksha, and there is no word. You will have to find a word to translate Shraddha. There is no word in the West in any language to translate Shraddha. And many other things. Then, what else? We have to strip yoga out of the values because people won't feel comfortable, or they can find offensive if you say that there is a value which is ahimsa, which includes the animal kingdom, which means animals shouldn't be in your plate. So ahimsa is not part of yoga. Let's put it out as well. Then, of course, the vegetarian diet, the diet goes along with ahimsa. Then let's remove all these other values, like yamas and niyamas. They are not necessary because we are in the West, we have our own values. Okay, then the things that make yoga, like the positive vision of the human body, the idea that you are not alone, that there is a world in which the vegetal kingdom and the animal kingdom are part and have the same right to live that we have as human beings, and all that is removed. And so I have a question to you. If you remove all that from yoga, and of course you remove the search for moksha, you remove vichara along with the rest, then what is left? So the question arises, if we don't speak about yamas and niyamas, if you don't speak about the vegetarian diet, if you don't have any teaching about the non-dual vision, and if you put aside moksha, do you have the right to call yoga yoga? So that is why I have the feeling that yoga is suffering a process of cultural assimilation. You know what is cultural assimilation? There is one word that has been used by the first anthropologists at the end of the 19th century and beginning of last century, which is acculturation. You get that? Acculturation is a word, is a term to define the process of assimilation of one culture by another culture which is dominant. A good example is chai. Chai is part of the Indian culture, but the plant comes from China. Camellia sinensis means that one which comes from China. So that is a cultural assimilation. The harmonium that we play here comes from France. That is cultural assimilation. You don't find any harmoniums. We know that because we break our backs every time we come to India. We bought one or two, and we bring these instruments to the West because it doesn't exist anymore there. The accordion was born out of the harmonium. That is cultural assimilation. And the same process is happening with yoga in the West. And it is happening this way that I am telling you. And this acculturation or this assimilation of yoga by the Western civilization could happen for two reasons, maybe. One of them being good intentions going the wrong direction. Okay, let's try to adapt yoga to the Western world. And then in the middle or in between, someone realizes that they lost their way, but still that has such an impulse that it's still going on in the wrong direction, which is extreme simplification, removing moksha from yoga. As you know, it's the goal. There is no yoga shastra that says something different from that. So the goal of yoga is the goal of Advaita Vedanta. If you remove Vedanta from yoga, then no yoga, just exercise. The second reason for this process could be that maybe there is some ideology in the West that is trying to pick yoga with some other obscure intentions that we don't see clearly. I will give you two examples of that. There is one current of modern postural yoga that they call in the West scientifical yoga, which it's like these people are very academic and they try to measure the level of oxygen that you breathe in, the CO2 level when you breathe out, and they go into those researches which are very nice in themselves, but they say yoga is only the exercise, nothing else, and that contradicts our Shastra, as you well know. That is what I call the UHT yoga. You know what is the UHT? UHT is ultra high temperature. It's a process of pasteurification, of purification of milk. Like you get the milk, but you don't get the calf, you don't get the cow, you don't get all the good things that come along. You just get the molecule of milk there. So they try to do that with yoga. The second example is what they call in the US no Om yoga, which means yoga without Om. And that is actually a business in the US that say, if you come here to practice yoga with us, we won't chant any Om, and of course we won't explain anything about Om, first of all because we don't know anything about that, and second because it doesn't matter, because that is from those other people. And then the slogan for that business is no mantra, no granola. You know what is granola? No, you don't. You're laughing, but you don't. Granola is someone like me. It's an American slang which is not very nice to point to some person who is a vegetarian. So he's a grain eater, a granola eater, long hair, kind of hippie, you know, who is centered into self-knowledge or meditation. So they say, here you won't find that kind of people. No Om, no granola means you won't find any offensive person here, because this, of course, is directed to, as a commercial enterprise, to the upper middle class in the US. And they don't mix with people like us. Maybe they think we are smelly hippies or whatever. So this shows fear of what we can call the other. And the other is all of us. Like they are the Westerners, they put a wall between them and the Hindu Dharma, between them and the Indian people, between them and those who show some interest in following the Dharma. So they build this wall, and that shows fear. And this fear is a kind of xenophobic attitude. Am I pronouncing it properly? Xenophobic means that someone has fear about another people, another kind of human being, or another culture, or another place. And that is one of the worst things that can happen to yoga, because this xenophobic attitude will separate yoga from its very essence. You know? And then the reason behind that is that they just want to sell asana practice as if it was yoga. And that's all. That's what they want. If they say, we do exercise or we do Western yoga or whatever, it won't sell. They have to use the word yoga, because yoga is selling lots and lots. Like the internal brute product, what's the name of that Modi ji has approved now? The
Make in India?
No. The national.
International yoga?
No. When you talk about economy, like a few weeks ago, it has been voted here in India. That's the word that lacks me. The money that the government will spend in education, health, economy, in defense and all that. What's the name of that? The global product budget. Yes! Thank you, Swamiji. So, to give you an idea, there is the American budget, the United States budget, and there they have money for this, money for that, money for that. And they started a few years ago to count yoga. And yoga moves like hundreds of millions of dollars yearly, only in the US. Not to say anything about Brazil, where yoga is really popular, or Europe, where there is no research about that. You get the idea? Like, it's big business. It's a money-making operation, because yoga has only 2 letters. The word is magical. Can't sell yoga for happy life, yoga for sex, yoga for whatever. And if you want to sell yoga, if you want to make money out of yoga, you need to present it as something rational, technical, as pure exercise. And that is where we lose the way, because we are just walking. We don't walk with a goal. We are not reaching any goal unless you consider that making money is the real goal. So that is the ideology that I was talking about earlier, that is hidden behind this attitude of fear, this xenophobic attitude towards those who want moksha, because they say no Om, no granola. No Om means no non-dual vision, no Advaita, because what is the meaning of Om? So the excuse for that, they say that the reason is that they want to make yoga available for the people, and that is a lie, because the fact that you don't use yoga as that you don't use Sanskrit to define the yogic terms, they say that is kind of making yoga difficult for the Americans or for the Brazilians or for the Portuguese people. So let's remove the Sanskrit names. Sanskrit language doesn't make yoga obscure, doesn't make yoga something which is unreachable. It's just be a little patient, you will recognize the beauty of the Sanskrit language. So if moksha is the goal, and they remove, along with all these things that we already mentioned, the vichara process, what will happen? Because vichara is something that is like in the Gita and in the Yoga Sutra, and maybe the Yoga Sutra is not that important in terms of the Vedic tradition, but it's a really, really famous work in the West. Like people, no one understands it, but all of them have the feeling that they have to at the least know Atha Yoga Nushasanam Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and the first bunch of sutras from Patanjali. But you know that the Bhagavad Gita is much more important as a yoga work than the Yoga Sutras. And in both works, both Sri Krishna and Patanjali talk about the importance of vichara, self-inquiry. And that is why they also speak about the importance of vairagya and abhyasa. So, when you remove vichara from yoga, what happens at the end? People become conformists. They lose their sensitivity. They become brute. Because instead of using the practice as a tool for leading the asana, they take the practice as something that will make them insensible to the world and that make them more conformists. Can we use that expression? That is what happens when you lose vichara. So, on the way, we also lost the antarkarana shuddhi process, the process of purification of the body, mind, senses complex. And if you lose that, then no yoga at all. So, that is the situation, and that is what you see when you find these people walking around, so compassion. I used to say, Puja Swamiji, that I was his sheep dog, barking dog. I would bark at people in Brazil and in Portugal, because we live half of the year in each of those two countries, to ask them, hey, there's more to yoga than that. There's more to yoga than that. Please come to Rishikesh. Please come to listen Puja Swamiji's words. And I tell you one more thing, just to end with this speech. You may know Puja Swamiji for Aim for Seva and all the contributions he has done to the public health system in India and the education and the arts and everything. The other thing that maybe you are not aware of is that Puja Swamiji, he, of course he's not alone, but he's one of the big responsible teachers, true masters, to make real yoga available to us. And I am talking in the name of some of the Brazilian yogis and Portuguese yogis, because his teaching changed our vision forever. That is what I had to share with you, and thank you so much for listening. Namaskaram.